This peace plan has been leaked to the media, Scott, and Vladimir Putin has already said he's not going to speak with Vladimir Zelensky, which seems to be a key part of this. Talk about what you mean that this peace plan is doomed to fail from the outset.
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to talk about the preposterous notion that Donald Trump believes he has any leverage over Vladimir Putin. I don't know what Trump thinks his role is here. He has tried to distance himself from the Russian-Ukrainian conflict by saying that had he been president in 2020, had he won the 2020 election and been president in 2021, that this war would never have happened. He wouldn't have allowed it to happen. And Vladimir Putin, I think, in an effort to stroke Donald Trump's ego, has insinuated the same thing, except that's not the case. I mean, let's be honest. This is Donald Trump's war. The troop movement that the Russians were doing back in the spring of 2021 is because of policies enacted by the United States regarding Ukraine during Donald Trump's presidency. Let's never forget that it was under Donald Trump in 2017 that the U.S. Army began training in Western Ukraine, 1 battalion of Ukrainian troops every 55 days for the stated purpose of going east to fight the Russians to liberate the Donbass. That was the mission of the American forces. Under Donald Trump, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, and other military equipment were provided to Ukraine. Under Donald Trump, Russia was subjected to stringent economic sanctions because of their reaction to the right-wing Banderist Nazis seizing power in February 2014 and attempting to eradicate the Russian-speaking populations of Crimea and the Donbass. Under Donald Trump, the fraud of Minsk was continued, was perpetrated. Donald Trump knew that Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande and then later Emmanuel Macron weren't serious about going forward with Minsk. He knew that it was a sham. He knew that it was simply to buy time so that he, Donald Trump, could train the Ukrainian army to fight the Russians. And so Donald Trump, it lives in a never land. The Russians know damn well what he did. They know his role, and they know that he can't be trusted. But they also know another thing, that Russia has won this war, and that Russia will win this war, no matter what the United States or Europe or NATO does. There's nothing the United States, Europe, or NATO can do to change this outcome. Even direct military intervention. NATO is incapable of projecting meaningful military power into Ukraine. So what does Donald Trump think he's going to do? There's a political opportunity here for Donald Trump to focus on a strategic outcome, which would be to engender stability in a post-conflict Europe by focusing on a European security framework that would be acceptable to both Russia and NATO. This is something that the Russians were prepared to discuss and negotiate back in December of 2021. But Trump isn't focused on that. He thinks he's going to come in and he's going to dictate the terms of conflict resolution. This plan that people are putting out isn't really a plan. It's the uneducated musings of a single individual, Keith Kellogg, who back in, I guess, the spring of last year, published this paper, a nonsensical babbling of distortions, manufactured evidence, just straight out lies about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, total misperceptions about the reality of Russia. And from this, all the talking points that are contained in the so-called 100-day plan emerge. None of it's based on reality, and Russia will be dismissive of everything. And then, Trump, recognizing that he doesn't hold the strongest hand, then does the most absurd thing possible. He threatens Vladimir Putin. In a Truth Social post that he put out, he said that we could do it the easy way or the hard way. The easy way, of course, is the equivalent of a Russian capitulation. And again, just to show you the ignorance, the absolute ignorance of Keith Kellogg, and those who are writing this. The plan they've put forward, the timeline of this, as if they're throwing a bone to Russia, has the deal, which is in effect a Russian surrender, being finalized on May 9th, Victory Day, the biggest holiday in Russia, the most sacred holiday in Russia, the most solemn holiday in Russia. And this year made even more so by the fact that it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the Allied defeat of Nazi Germany, a defeat that was brought about by the fact that the Soviet Union is responsible for engaging, destroying 60 to 70% of Nazi Germany's military capability. That war was won by the Soviet Union. Berlin was liberated by the Soviet Union. Oh yeah, for all those people out there that forgot, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet Union. There was Holocaust Remembrance Day the other day where they once again just ignored the role played by the Soviet Union in liberating Auschwitz and again defeating Nazi Germany. But so that just shows you how absurd they are. But the crux of this, the key of this, we could do it the easy way or the hard way, Trump said. The easy way is Russia surrenders. The hard way, of course, is the United States will sanction Russia, put tariffs on Russia, focusing on Russia's energy production, the large oil companies. Then Keith Kellogg came out, and again, underscoring just how ignorant he is about any aspect of the U.S.-Russian dynamic or how Russia relates with the rest of the world. He said, we'll lower the price of oil to $45 a barrel. And that will cause the Russians to lose billions of dollars. They can't afford this war, and they'll capitulate. And the Russians looked at that and said, nah, you don't understand. This war isn't about oil. So whatever you do with the price of oil, it isn't going to change. We have our strategic objectives that are linked to the national security of Russia, et cetera. But let's look at that $45 a barrel again. Why would he say that? He did that because I guess he did a Google search and he asked the question, what is the break-even point for Russian oil? And the Google response is about $41 to $44 a barrel. So he came up with 45. I don't know why he came up with 45, but that's the number he put out there. But the problem is that break-even point. There's two aspects of break-even for the Russians. They need to sell oil at around 70, 71 bucks to a barrel to balance their budget, because the Russian budget, unlike the American one, doesn't run on a deficit. They seek to balance it every year, and they do so because they primarily sell oil. But that's the balanced budget. The price that Russia pays to get oil out of the ground is the extraction break-even point, and that averages around $41 a barrel. So I guess what Kellogg is saying is we're going to collapse the oil market so the Russians can't afford to bring oil out of the ground. Except that number, the 41, is an average that takes into account the very expensive oil extraction that takes place in the north, in the polar regions, where they have to get it out of the frozen ground and put it on ships with icebreakers and move it around to market. That's expensive. But the other part that goes into it is the very cheap extraction that takes place in the Urals and other continental oil, where a significant percentage of Russia's oil comes from. And that oil comes out of the ground at between 12 and 20 bucks a barrel. So the Russians will be able to keep pumping out oil forever. Will they balance their budget? Nope. But see, the Russians can go 2 years without balancing a budget. That just means they go into deficit spending and they dig themselves a hole. Hell, we've been doing it. We got $37 trillion worth of debt. Russia doesn't have any, but that's okay. Now, in order to get it down to 45, though, how do you do that, Keith? I mean, what's your plan? Well, Donald Trump says we're going to go to the Saudis and we're going to get them to help us drop the price, which means the Saudis have to start overproducing even more than they already are overproducing. The Saudi break-even point for their budget is around 85 bucks a barrel. They're already losing money right now. So it's not in Saudi's interest to lower it anymore because they've got, but Saudi has a lot of, economic reserves. They're able to live off of, funds that they have, et cetera. But the Saudi extraction, what it costs for them to produce a barrel of oil is around $10. So you see, you can lower it to 45 and Saudi Arabia will be able to pump oil all day long because they're not losing any money pumping oil. They're just not balancing their budget. So to get the Saudis to drop it to 45 puts them in a bind. puts the Russians in a bind, but both of them will be able to continue to pump oil, which is the important part of this equation. It doesn't stop them from pumping oil. Now we come to the United States. Keith Kellogg failed to consider the following. Permian Basin, West Texas. If you've been watching Landman, a wonderful show with Billy Bob Thornton, it talks all about the oil industry and the difficulties there. The Permian Basin has two types of wells. You have the old established wells that are there that are pumping out oil regularly. And it's relatively cheap. It costs about $33 a barrel to get the oil out of the ground. But all new wells drilled in the United States since 2020 are drilled in the Permian Basin. All new wells, all our new oil growth. And the price per barrel is around 66. That's the break-even point. So if you're dropping oil down to $45 a barrel and you're in the long game to try and crush the Russian economy, that means that you're going to be keeping this price over a sustained period, months, if not years. And what will happen is that U.S. oil production will drop by 1/3 because all of the wildcat companies, all the small independents who went out there to try and make money because the U.S. government said we're going to have stability and we're going to project $78 a barrel for some time now, fluctuate up and down, a couple bucks here and there. They can put hundreds of millions of dollars of their money into the ground on the bet that they're going to get it out and make money. They all go bankrupt overnight. Boom, done. Drop the price of oil below $50 and Permian Basin new drilling collapses. And 1/3 of U.S. oil production goes away. These people go bankrupt. And if West Texas goes bankrupt, the United States goes bankrupt. It's a problem. Did Keith Kellogg consider this when he put this number out there? Did the wannabe Treasury Secretary, the designated Treasury Secretary who talked about, collapsing oil, did he consider it? Did Donald Trump consider it? The point is they didn't. They don't know what they're doing. They're trying to play a tough man's game, but they don't have the data points. They're just out there puffing their chest out and spouting nonsense. And, this is the reality. The hard way will be, if you go the hard way, it will blow back on the United States, just like the sanctioning of the Russian economy back in 2021, 2022 blew back on Europe and destroyed the European economy. Trump's hard way will end up destroying the American economy.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up this maximum pressure campaign that Donald Trump and his administration is proposing. I don't know if you saw, but Marco Rubio spoke with the EU's high representative, top diplomat, and also reiterated that they support, that the United States, Donald Trump's administration, supports sanctions on Russia, increasing them in order to force Russia to the table. Now, Vladimir Putin, Russia, has already warned that this is not going to work, that they don't even pay attention to this. But at the same time, Scott, my question to you is this already an indication that the Trump administration is not serious about negotiations, or do you see it another way?
I think the Trump administration and the president himself is coming face to face to the fact that Keith Kellogg's simplistic formulations aren't going to work. There's been talk about a phone call between Trump and Putin, but that call hasn't happened yet. People keep asking why not, because they're not ready. Trump gets one chance here, one chance to go in there and prove to Vladimir Putin that he can be a broker for conflict termination. But this can only happen if Russia's terms are met. When Russia initiated this conflict, they said, we have some basic goals and objectives. One is that Ukraine will never, ever, 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 I think that's a Taylor Swift song, I'll never, ever, 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 but Ukraine will never, ever, ever be a member of NATO, ever. Not some 20-year waiting period, 30-year waiting period, 50, never, ever, ever be a member of NATO. Two, that Ukraine will be demilitarized. I mean, the Kellogg plan has the Ukrainian army staying intact, getting re-equipped, reinforced, rebuilt by the West. For what purpose? So it's that striking arm that Donald Trump tried to build up in his first term? No, the Russians say, no, it goes down to zero, and then we decide what level will be built up, probably nothing more than about 50,000 people to secure the borders. That's all Ukraine needs. Demilitarization. All the NATO equipment will either be destroyed, captured by Russia, or returned to NATO, but none of it will stay in Ukraine. And this is non-negotiable. I don't know why Trump doesn't understand this. Why do you think this war is being fought? And then the last one is denazification. And again, people have said this is lip service, but it's real. The Banderist ideology must be eradicated because it's a cancer. It keeps metastasizing, keeps reemerging. It must be carved out, the tumor destroyed, etc. That can only be done by overthrowing the current Ukrainian government, replacing it with one that's more compliant to Russia. There will be a change in the Ukrainian constitution and the composition of the Ukrainian government, and the people that currently populate the Ukrainian government won't be a part of the future of Ukraine. That's what denazification looks like. What part of this doesn't Trump understand? So, these are the realities that the Trump administration isn't grasping, and they're starting to realize that Putin's serious. I mean, Putin is sending signal after signal after signal. I mean, most recently, he didn't say that Zelensky can't be at the table. In fact, he said, "Look, if Zelensky wants to be at the table, that's okay. I can identify guys who can go to a table that has Zelensky at the table." Zelensky won't sign the document because Zelensky isn't the president of Ukraine. He has no legitimacy under the Ukrainian constitution. It'll be the head of the Rada, the parliament, who will step in and sign. But Zelensky will not only will not sign the document, he won't be part of the post-Ukraine, world. And this is a non-negotiable. I mean, this is not, and if the United States wants to do it, what they need to understand is all Russia's going to say is thanks, but no thanks. Have a good day. We're going to continue advancing on the front line. And we've reached a point where correlation of forces where the Ukrainians are collapsing. Even the head of the Ukrainian intelligence service, who just a couple of months ago was saying, Russia's losing the war, we're kicking ass, we're doing this, has come out and said, we're done. It's finished. It's over. It's collapsing around us as we speak. There's nothing left. It's over. And that's the reality. And Russia's just going to keep pushing forward until everything collapses, and they will get the outcome they want. Now, for all those people out there who put the little Ukrainian flag on their social media, to say, "Oh, look at me, I'm such a good person because I care about the Ukrainians." Understand this: if you continue to articulate for the continued provision of military equipment to Ukraine, you're condemning hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to death. Let me explain how this works, guys. Okay, right now, there's sort of a balance that's been an equilibrium on the battlefield that's not to Ukraine's advantage. We're talking about a war of attrition where Russia has dictated the terms of the conflict on Ukraine based upon realities, when Russia has perfected the art of grinding the Ukrainians down. Normally, when you carry out offensive operations against a defender, you want a 3-to-1, minimum 3-to-1 ratio, because that's the kind of casualties you're going to be taking. You're going to lose a lot more guys attacking a dug-in defended position. The Russians have never had that. The Russians, when they even started this war, were attacking at basically a 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 disadvantage. But the casualty ratio has always been to the distinct advantage of the Russians. But they've gone from 3-to-1 on bad days to 5-to-1 to 7-to-1 to 10-to-1. I've been talking to Russian journalists that say today in some of these battles that the casualty ratio is 20-to-1. The Ukrainians just don't stand a chance. The Russians come in with superior firepower, total control of the tactical area, and they just basically come in, surround the Ukrainians, and blow them up in their bunker, causing the Ukrainians to either surrender or die. And it's a 20-to-1 casualty ratio. There are days when the Russians don't lose a single person dead in some of these major battles. That's how much in control of it is. Now, I know you're going to say, well, that's not what we're being told. They're starting to tell the truth now. The BBC has come out and done a 180, and it floated some numbers that are closer to the truth than anybody in the West has been willing to acknowledge. They're talking about 95 to 98,000 Russian dead. That's Ministry of Defense dead. That's probably an accurate number. But you have to add into that, Wagner. You have to add in some volunteer forces, the the Donetsk People's Militia, Lugansk People's Militia, et cetera. By the time you add in all these numbers dating back to the beginning of the war, you're probably up around 140, 150,000 Russian dead. That's a lot. Remember, it took us 10 years in Vietnam to lose 58,000 dead. So here, this shows you the intensity of the war. Ukrainians have lost over 1 million dead, 1.1 and climbing dead. This is the real number, and nobody wants to acknowledge it, but it's real. You can't deny it. And the BBC is starting to say, yeah, that's the truth. And remember, we're talking about dead. That means now wounded. The Russians are probably a 3-to-1 ratio. So we can safely say 450,000, Russian wounded, that 600,000 Russian casualties overall. Ukrainians, it won't be 3-to-1. One of the reasons why that 1.1 million number is so big is the Ukrainians suck at getting their guys off the battlefield. They abandon their dead. There are dead down there buried that it's going to take years to find them when this thing is done. So you're probably looking at another 1.5 million Ukrainian casualties. So we're up around 2.5 million Ukrainian casualties in this conflict. This is real. This is the real numbers. And this is why Ukraine has run out of manpower. There's just nothing left.